21 Black R&B legends who died tragically and mysteriously. Some of the greatest voices in black music didn't simply fade away. Their lives ended suddenly, violently, and sometimes under circumstances that still raise uncomfortable questions. Aaliyah was only 22. Marvin Gaye was killed one day before his 45th birthday. Sam Cooke's fatal shooting has fueled debate for generations, while Prince's unexpected death stunned millions around the world. Behind the timeless songs are final chapters filled with accidents, illness, addiction, violence, and unanswered questions, but we'll separate documented facts from rumors. Welcome to Remembered Lives channel as we uncover the tragic endings of 21 Black R&B legends. Subscribe now and tell us in the comments. Which loss shocked you the most? Aaliyah. Aaliyah was only 22 when a life already filled with extraordinary promise ended in seconds. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Detroit, she emerged during the 1990s with a smooth, understated vocal style that helped reshape contemporary R&B. By her late teens, songs such as One in a Million and Are You That Somebody had established her as far more than another young singer. Working with producers including Tim Allen and Missy Elliott, she helped popularize a futuristic sound whose influence continued long after her death. Her ambitions stretched beyond music. Aaliyah appeared in Romeo Must Die alongside Jet Li, and later portrayed Queen Akasha Ya'o in Queen of the Damned. Her self-titled third album arrived in 2001, seemingly opening the next stage of a career moving confidently between records, fashion, and cinema. Then came August 25, 2001. After filming the music video for Rock the Boat in the Bahamas, Aaliyah and members of her team boarded a Cessna 402B at Marsh Harbor Airport for a flight to Florida. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft crashed, killing the pilot and all 8 passengers. Official aviation records confirm the 9 fatalities. Her death has attracted rumors for decades, but responsible storytelling should separate documented findings from speculation. There is no credible basis for turning Aaliyah's death into an unexplained conspiracy simply because it was shocking. That distinction makes her story no less heartbreaking. Aaliyah died before audiences could discover the full extent of the artist and actress she might become. More than 2 decades later, her influence remains audible in modern R&B while photographs preserve an image forever frozen at 22. Some stars leave behind a completed legacy. Aaliyah left something more haunting, a brilliant beginning without the chance for an ending. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye spent his career turning complicated human emotions into music. Love, loneliness, desire, war, faith, environmental anxiety. Few soul singers could make those subjects feel as intimate as he did. Beginning within Motown's hit-making system, Gaye became famous through recordings such as How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You before pushing toward increasingly personal artistic territory. His transformation reached a landmark with What's Going On in 1971. Rather than simply delivering romantic singles, Gaye confronted social unrest, war, poverty, and ecological concerns through an album that became central to his artistic legacy. Later came the sensuality of Let's Get It On, followed by turbulent personal and professional years. Then in the early 1980s, Sexual Healing brought him renewed commercial success and his first Grammy victories. But behind that comeback was profound instability. Gaye struggled with cocaine use, financial difficulties, depression, and a deeply troubled relationship with his father Marvin Gaye Sr. By late 1983, the singer had moved into his parents' Los Angeles home. The arrangement would end catastrophically. On April 1, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday, an argument between father and son escalated. Marvin Gaye Sr. shot his son, killing him at age 44. The Los Angeles County coroner identified gunshot wounds as the cause of death. This was undeniably tragic, but it should not be marketed as an unsolved mystery. The identity of the shooter was known, and Gaye's father was prosecuted. What remains haunting is the emotional path that brought one of America's greatest voices to such a violent final morning. That ending can easily overshadow everything before it. It should not. Marvin Gaye helped expand what popular black music could discuss, and how deeply it could speak. His death was devastating, but his music survived it, and generations later, What's Going On still sounds less like a relic of the past than a question society has yet to answer. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston possessed a voice so extraordinary that statistics almost seem inadequate to describe its impact. Born in Newark, New Jersey, she emerged from a deeply musical family and became one of the defining voices of the 1980s and 1990s. Songs such as Saving All My Love for You, Greatest Love of All, and I Wanna Dance with Somebody turned her into an international superstar, while her interpretation of I Will Always Love You became inseparable from The Bodyguard, the 1992 film in which she starred opposite Kevin Costner. Yet behind the immaculate performances, Houston's private life became increasingly turbulent. Her marriage to Bobby Brown attracted relentless media attention, and Houston later spoke openly about drug use. As the years passed, concern about her health sometimes overshadowed discussion of the remarkable instrument that had made her famous. On February 11, 2012, Houston was found unresponsive in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel one day before the Grammy Awards. She was 48. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning with heart disease and cocaine use contributing. That official conclusion matters. Whitney's death was shocking and tragic, but responsible storytelling should not transform it into an unsupported murder conspiracy simply because questions and rumors circulated afterward. Her ending remains painful, precisely because no invented mystery is required. Here was a woman whose voice once seemed almost indestructible, yet whose life revealed how vulnerable even the brightest stars can become. Whitney Houston should therefore be remembered for more than her final hours. Long before tragedy became part of her story, she had already changed popular singing forever. The struggles were real, but so was the astonishing voice that survived them. Sam Cooke. Few deaths in soul history have generated as much enduring debate as Sam Cooke's. Before that terrible night in December 1964, Cooke had already traveled an extraordinary distance from gospel brilliance with the Soul Stirrers to becoming one of America's most important popular singers. You Send Me, Cupid, Wonderful World and Chain Gang showcased his effortless warmth, while A Change Is Gonna Come would become one of the most enduring recordings associated with the civil rights era. Cooke was also developing unusual independence for a black artist of his generation. He became involved in publishing and business affairs at a time when performers frequently surrendered control of their work. His career appeared to be entering another important phase. Then everything ended on December 11, 1964. Cooke, only 33, was shot at the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles by motel manager Bertha Franklin. According to the official account, Cooke arrived there with Aaliyah Boyer. After a confrontation developed, he entered Franklin's office, where Franklin said she shot him because she feared for her life. A coroner's jury subsequently ruled the killing justifiable homicide. Yet skepticism surrounding the circumstances never completely disappeared. Contradictory perceptions of what happened that night helped generate decades of speculation. That distinction is essential. Questions and alternative theories exist, but they are not proof that Cooke was assassinated. The temptation to turn his death into a definitive conspiracy is understandable because of his fame, business ambitions, and importance to Black America. But no fake news means acknowledging where documented history ends and speculation begins. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why Cooke's final chapter still feels so unsettling. His life ended violently, but his voice did not. A Change Is Gonna Come became even larger after his death. A haunting promise from a man who never lived to witness how deeply the song would resonate. Prince. Prince spent his career making the impossible look effortless. Singer, songwriter, producer, multi-instrumentalist, bandleader, and electrifying performer, Prince Rogers Nelson resisted almost every attempt to place him inside a single musical category. Rock, funk, R&B, pop, soul, and psychedelia could coexist within the same performance, often under the control of one remarkably independent artist. The 1980s transformed him into a global phenomenon. 1999 expanded his audience, but Purple Rain pushed him into another dimension. The album and film produced classics including When Doves Cry and Purple Rain, while establishing an image. Purple clothing, theatrical sensuality, virtuoso musicianship that became instantly recognizable. Prince also fought fiercely for artistic control. His highly publicized dispute with Warner Brothers led him to appear with the word slave written on his face and temporarily abandon his stage name for an unpronounceable symbol. Beneath the eccentricity was a serious argument about ownership and who should control an artist's work. On April 21, 2016, Prince was found dead at Paisley Park in Minnesota. He was 57. The Midwest Medical Examiner determined that he died from fentanyl toxicity and classified the death as accidental. An investigation later failed to establish who supplied the counterfeit pills containing fentanyl, and prosecutors said there was insufficient evidence to bring criminal charges. That unresolved question should not be confused with evidence that Prince was murdered. His death was sudden enough to produce endless theories, but the verified facts are already devastating. An artist famous for controlling virtually every detail of his creative universe encountered something he could not control. Prince died at 57. His catalog, however, continues to demonstrate why calling him merely an R&B star was always too small a description. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman could make heartbreak sound elegant, standing tall, glamorous, and commanding under stage lights. She possessed a deep, expressive contralto capable of transforming vulnerability into something almost regal. During the late 1970s and 1980s, recordings, such as You Know How to Love Me, Living All Alone, and Old Friend, established her as a distinctive presence across soul, R&B, jazz, and adult contemporary music. Her gifts reached beyond recording studios. Hyman appeared on Broadway in Sophisticated Ladies, the Duke Ellington musical review, earning a Tony Award nomination. On stage, she projected sophistication and authority. Yet the emotional reality away from audiences was considerably more difficult. Hyman experienced serious personal struggles over the years, and accounts of her life describe battles involving depression, substance use, loneliness, and career disappointments. Those difficulties should be approached with compassion rather than transformed into entertainment. Her story is powerful precisely because the contrast between public elegance and private suffering was so profound. On June 30, 1995, Hyman died in New York at age 45. Her death was ruled suicide following an overdose. She had been scheduled to perform at the Apollo Theater that evening. There is no responsible basis for presenting her death as a secret industry assassination or unexplained conspiracy. The tragedy lies elsewhere. Audiences could hear extraordinary emotional depth in her recordings without necessarily understanding how much pain existed behind that voice. Hyman's music continued after her death, including the posthumous album I Refuse to Be Lonely. Even its title now carries an especially poignant resonance. For listeners who remember discovering her during R&B's sophisticated late 1970s and 1980s era, Phyllis Hyman remains unforgettable, not because of how her story ended, but because of the dignity, richness, and emotional honesty she left inside every song. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway possessed the kind of voice that could make celebration feel spiritual and sorrow feel almost unbearably intimate. Born in Chicago in 1945 and raised in St. Louis, he developed his musical foundation in church before studying at Howard University. By the early 1970s, Hathaway had become one of soul music's most distinctive talents, combining gospel, jazz, R&B, and social consciousness with remarkable sophistication. Songs such as The Ghetto, Someday We'll All Be Free, and the enduring holiday classic This Christmas demonstrated his extraordinary range. His collaborations with Roberta Flack produced timeless recordings, including Where Is the Love and The Closer I Get to You. Behind that brilliance, however, Hathaway experienced severe mental health struggles. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and endured periods when his condition disrupted both his personal life and professional career. The Recording Academy's account of his legacy acknowledges these struggles and the advocacy they later inspired within his family. On January 13, 1979, Hathaway was found dead below New York's Essex House Hotel. He was only 33. Authorities concluded that he had fallen from a 15th floor window, and his death was ruled a suicide. Because of the unusual circumstances, questions and speculation have persisted among some admirers. Yet there is no credible evidence establishing that another person caused his death. A responsible account must distinguish lingering curiosity from documented fact. The tragedy becomes even sharper when we remember what Hathaway left unfinished. His music suggested an artist still capable of enormous creative growth. Decades later, his influence remains unmistakable, and in 2019, the Recording Academy honored him posthumously with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Donny Hathaway died young, but the warmth and vulnerability inside his recordings continue to make him feel startlingly present. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's final hours became one of the most scrutinized celebrity deaths in modern history, but the story begins decades earlier with a child from Gary, Indiana. whose extraordinary abilities transformed him into a global phenomenon. After emerging with the Jackson 5, Michael developed a solo career that reached unprecedented heights with albums including Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad. His combination of R&B, soul, pop, dance, and visual storytelling fundamentally altered popular entertainment. By the 1980s, Jackson was no longer merely successful. Thriller became the best-selling album in history, while performances such as his televised moonwalk turned individual moments into cultural landmarks. But enormous fame brought relentless scrutiny, legal controversies, physical pressures, and an increasingly complicated private existence. In 2009, Jackson was preparing for the ambitious This Is It concert residency in London. He never reached opening night. On June 25, 2009, Jackson died at his Los Angeles home at age 50. The Los Angeles County coroner determined that the cause was acute propofol intoxication with benzodiazepines, contributing, and classified the death as a homicide. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, had administered propofol as Jackson struggled with insomnia. A jury later convicted Murray of involuntary manslaughter. The medical examiner also testified that the evidence did not support the defense theory that Jackson had administered the fatal propofol himself. Those facts make invented conspiracy theories unnecessary. Jackson's death was shocking, but it was investigated extensively and produced a criminal prosecution. For generations who remember watching the Jackson 5 mature into the era of Thriller, his death felt like the disappearance of someone who had somehow always been present. Michael Jackson's final chapter was tragic, but it cannot contain the scale of his legacy. The music, choreography, videos, and influence remain embedded in global popular culture. Tammi Terrell. Tammi Terrell's story remains one of Motown's most heartbreaking because everything happened with astonishing speed. Born Thomasina Montgomery in Philadelphia in 1945, she began pursuing music while still extremely young. After early recordings and a period working with James Brown, she attracted Berry Gordy's attention and signed with Motown in 1965. There she was paired with Marvin Gaye, creating one of soul music's most beloved partnerships. Together, Gaye and Terrell recorded songs that became Motown standards: Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Your Precious Love, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing, and You're All I Need to Get By. Their chemistry sounded effortless, and their first collaborative album, United, reached number 7 on the US R&B album chart. But while her career was soaring, Terrell was experiencing persistent headaches. During a 1967 performance in Virginia, she collapsed on stage into Gaye's arms. After another collapse, doctors discovered a malignant brain tumor. What followed was an agonizing series of medical procedures rather than the glamorous future her success seemed to promise. Terrell underwent 8 operations. Remarkably, she continued recording when her health permitted and released the solo album Irresistible in 1969. But on March 16, 1970, after falling into a coma following her 8th operation, Tammi Terrell died. She was only 24. Her death was tragic, not mysterious. Claims that someone secretly caused her fatal illness should not be presented as fact without evidence. For Marvin Gaye, the loss was devastating. Motown Museum notes that he temporarily withdrew from performing afterward. Tammi Terrell never reached 25, yet her voice became permanently attached to songs people still sing, nearly 6 decades later. Sometimes longevity is measured not in years lived, but in how long the music refuses to disappear. Gerald Levert. Gerald Levert inherited an extraordinary musical name, but he spent his career proving that inheritance alone could not explain his success. Born in Philadelphia in 1966 and raised in Cleveland, Gerald was the son of Eddie Levert, the commanding lead vocalist of the O'Jays. Instead of remaining in his father's shadow, Gerald developed a rich, forceful voice of his own and helped create one of the defining R&B groups of the late 1980s and early 1990s. With his brothers Sean Levert and Mark Gordon, he formed Levert. Songs including Casanova, Pop 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 Goes My Mind, and Baby I'm Ready established the group as a major presence in contemporary R&B. Casanova even received Grammy nominations for the group. Gerald subsequently developed a successful solo career recording romantic R&B that showcased the emotional weight of his voice. He also joined Keith Sweat and Johnny Gill to form the supergroup LSG, connecting 3 prominent voices from the era. Then came a sudden ending. On November 2006, Gerald Levert died at only 40 years old. His death was later determined to have resulted accidentally from a combination of prescription and over-the-counter medications. Contemporary reporting describing his brother Sean's later death also records Gerald's cause as an accidental drug mixture. That distinction matters. Gerald's passing was unexpected and devastating, but there is no factual justification for presenting it as an unsolved murder or mysterious industry plot. The Levert family would suffer another terrible blow less than 2 years later when Sean died at 39. Gerald Levert left behind something his famous surname could never guarantee: an unmistakable voice. He entered music as Eddie Levert's son but departed having established a legacy unmistakably his own. Lisa Left Eye Lopes. Lisa Left Eye Lopes was never designed to disappear into the background. As the rapper and most unpredictable personality in TLC, she supplied an explosive contrast to the smooth vocals of Tiani A.T. Buzz Watkins and Rosanda Chili Thomas. Together they helped redefine 1990s R&B, combining hip-hop attitude, unforgettable videos, fashion humor, and socially conscious themes. TLC's achievements became enormous. Albums such as Crazy, Sexy, Cool, and Fan Mail produced defining hits including Creep, Waterfalls, No Scrubs, and I'm Pretty. The Recording Academy has described TLC's lasting influence on R&B while noting that Crazy, Sexy, Cool sold 23 million copies. Lopes was often the group's disruptive creative force. Her distinctive rap verses and outspoken personality made her instantly recognizable, while her turbulent relationship with NFL player Andre Rison generated intense tabloid coverage. Yet reducing her life to controversy ignores the imagination she contributed to TLC's identity. In 2002, Lopes traveled to Honduras, where she had frequently spent time on personal and spiritual retreats. On April 25, while driving a Mitsubishi Montero near La Ceiba, she lost control of the vehicle. The crash killed her at age 30, while several passengers survived. Her death was a devastating accident, not an established conspiracy. TLC subsequently had to complete 3D without her. The Recording Academy describes the loss as one of the most tragic challenges the group endured. For fans who experienced TLC at its peak, Left Eye's absence permanently changed the group's chemistry. T-Boz and Chili continued, but the original trio could never truly exist again. Lisa Lopes lived loudly, creatively, and sometimes chaotically. Her life ended at 30, yet every time that unmistakable voice interrupts a TLC classic, Left Eye suddenly sounds alive again. Johnny Ace. Johnny Ace became one of early R&B's brightest young stars, only to have his career end before it could reach its full potential. Born John Marshall Alexander, Jr. in Memphis in 1929, he emerged from the city's rhythm and blues scene with a smooth, romantic delivery that immediately connected with listeners. Songs such as My Song, Saving My Love for You, and Pledging My Love established him as an important voice of the early 1950s, when R&B was rapidly evolving toward the sounds that would later shape soul music. By 25, Ace had already accumulated an impressive sequence of R&B hits. His appeal rested not on explosive showmanship, but on tenderness. He could make a love song sound deeply personal. Everything suggested that greater success was ahead. Instead, Christmas Night in 1954 became the final chapter of his story. During a performance engagement at Houston's City Auditorium, Ace was backstage handling a revolver when the weapon discharged, fatally wounding him. His death was ruled accidental. Later retellings frequently claim that he died while deliberately playing Russian roulette, but accounts of exactly what occurred differed. That popular version, therefore, should not be presented as an unquestionable fact. The tragedy became even more haunting after his death. Pledging My Love turned into a major posthumous R&B hit, ensuring that audiences continued hearing the voice of a young man who would never record another song. Johnny Ace died before reaching 26, leaving historians to imagine how far his talent might have developed. His death remains shocking, but there is no need to embellish it. An emerging Black R&B star stood at the beginning of what could have been a remarkable career, and one catastrophic moment ended everything. Minnie Riperton. Minnie Riperton possessed one of the most instantly recognizable voices in American soul music. Born in Chicago in 1947, she developed her extraordinary vocal abilities early and eventually became known for a range that reached astonishingly high notes. Before achieving solo fame, she worked within Chicago's music scene and sang with Rotary Connection, developing a style that blended soul, jazz, rock, and experimentation. Her defining commercial breakthrough came with Lovin' You from the album Perfect Angel. The tender ballad reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1975 and showcased the upper register that made Riperton unmistakable. Behind the recording was something deeply personal. The song was connected to her husband Richard Rudolph and their family, including their daughter Maya Rudolph, who would later become a celebrated actress and comedian. Then Riperton received devastating news. In 1976, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent surgery. Rather than completely hiding her illness, she became publicly involved in cancer awareness, serving as a spokesperson for the American Cancer Society at a time when celebrities were far less likely to discuss serious illness openly. On July 12, 1979, Minnie Riperton died at only 31. Her death was tragic but not mysterious, and inventing uncertainty around its cause would distort her story. What deserves emphasis is the extraordinary contrast between the brevity of her life and the durability of her voice. Decades after her death, Lovin' You remains immediately recognizable, while generations of vocalists continue to admire her technique. Cancer ended Minnie Riperton's life far too early, but it could not erase the sound she left behind. David Ruffin. David Ruffin could turn romantic desperation into something almost physical. Born in Mississippi in 1941, he eventually joined the Temptations in 1964 and became one of the defining voices of Motown's golden period. His rough-edged tenor provided a dramatic contrast to the group's polished harmonies, and when Ruffin stepped forward to sing, audiences immediately knew who they were hearing. My Girl became the most famous example, but Ruffin's remarkable period with the Temptations also included Ain't Too Proud to Beg, I Wish It Would Rain, and Beauty Is Only Skin Deep. His performances communicated longing with such intensity that even familiar love song emotions seemed urgent. Yet behind the success, tensions developed. Ruffin wanted greater recognition. His behavior became increasingly difficult, and drug addiction complicated both his professional and personal life. The Temptations dismissed him in 1968, but Ruffin's story did not end there. He pursued a solo career and produced memorable recordings including My Whole World Ended the Moment You Left Me and Walk Away from Love. His unmistakable voice remained powerful even as stability proved difficult to maintain. On June 1, 1991, Ruffin died in Philadelphia at age 50. His death was attributed to an accidental cocaine overdose. Stories surrounding his final hours later generated speculation, but speculation should never be substituted for established evidence. The saddest truth needs no conspiracy. One of Motown's greatest voices spent years struggling with addiction before dying far too young. Ruffin's personal difficulties remain part of his biography, but they should not eclipse his contribution. Whenever My Girl begins, his voice still transports listeners directly back to an era when Motown was changing American music. Jesse Belvin. Jesse Belvin may not be as instantly recognizable today as some of the artists he influenced, but his place in early Black R&B deserves far greater attention. Born in 1932 and raised in Los Angeles, Belvin emerged during the 1950s as both a gifted vocalist and songwriter. His smooth approach moved naturally between rhythm and blues and doo-wop, helping shape the West Coast vocal sound during an important transitional period in American popular music. Goodnight My Love became one of Belvin's signature recordings and was later interpreted by numerous performers. He was also connected to the authorship history of the Penguins' classic Earth Angel, although disputes surrounding the song mean it would be misleading to simply credit Belvin as its sole creator. By the end of the decade, his talent suggested that significantly greater recognition might still be ahead. On February 6, 1960, Belvin performed at an integrated concert in Little Rock, Arkansas during a period of intense racial tension. After the show, he and his wife Joanne traveled by automobile. Near Hope, Arkansas, their vehicle was involved in a catastrophic head-on collision. Both were killed. Jesse Belvin was only 27. The circumstances later produced disturbing rumors that the car's tires had been deliberately sabotaged because of racial hostility connected to the concert. Those allegations have never been conclusively established, so they must remain exactly what the evidence supports: allegations, not proven history. Even without them, Belvin's ending was devastating. A young R&B artist and his wife died just as his career appeared capable of reaching another level. Jesse Belvin left an unfinished legacy, but his recordings and songwriting contributions remain woven into the foundations of early R&B. Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard stood at the beginning of one of Motown's greatest success stories, yet her own journey ended far differently from the glamorous image associated with the Supremes. Born in Detroit in 1943, Ballard helped form the group that eventually became the Supremes alongside Diana Ross and Mary Wilson. Before fame transformed them into international stars, the three young women endured unsuccessful singles and years of uncertainty while trying to establish themselves inside Berry Gordy's rapidly expanding Motown empire. The breakthrough eventually came, and the Supremes became a defining act of the 1960s. Their elegant appearance and polished harmonies helped carry songs such as Where Did Our Love Go Baby Love and Stop in the Name of Love around the world. But as Diana Ross increasingly became the group's focal point, Ballard experienced professional frustration and personal difficulties. In 1967, she was dismissed from the Supremes and replaced by Cindy Birdsong. Life afterward became painfully unstable. Ballard attempted a solo career, but it never approached the success she had experienced with the group. Financial problems followed, and accounts of her later years describe periods of severe hardship. Eventually, however, she began attempting a comeback and appeared publicly again, suggesting that another chapter might still be possible. It never arrived. On February 22, 1976, Florence Ballard died at only 32 after being hospitalized in Detroit. Her death was attributed to coronary thrombosis. There is no credible reason to transform her passing into an unexplained conspiracy. The tragedy lies instead in the contrast. Ballard helped create a group that became synonymous with Motown glamour, yet she lived long enough to experience how quickly fame could disappear. Today, her contribution is increasingly recognized as essential to the Supremes' foundation. Florence Ballard may have been removed from the group, but she cannot be removed from the history she helped create. Darrell Banks. Darrell Banks possessed a voice filled with the urgency that made 1960s soul music so powerful, but his career was cut short before he could achieve the recognition his talent promised. Born Darrell Banks in Ohio in 1937, and closely associated with Detroit's soul scene, Banks emerged during an era dominated by Motown while developing a sound that found particular appreciation among devotees of what later became known as Northern Soul. His defining recording arrived in 1966 with Open the Door to Your Heart. The song became an R&B hit and established Banks as a performer capable of combining emotional intensity with the driving rhythms prized by soul audiences. He followed it with recordings including Somebody Somewhere Needs You, another track that would become treasured by Northern soul collectors and dancers in Britain. Yet Banks never enjoyed the sustained commercial breakthrough achieved by many of his Detroit contemporaries. Only a few years after his biggest success, his life ended violently. On February 24, 1970, Banks became involved in a confrontation in Detroit connected to a woman he had reportedly been seeing. According to accounts of the incident, Banks encountered police officer Aaron Bullock, who was off duty at the time and involved with the same woman. The confrontation escalated and Bullock fatally shot Banks. The singer was just 32 years old. Because accounts of violent celebrity deaths can become distorted over decades, the safest retelling avoids inventing dialogue motives or secret conspiracies unsupported by documentation. What is established is already shocking enough. A promising soul singer died from gunfire during a personal confrontation at an age when his career still had considerable room to grow. Darrell Banks never became a household name like Marvin Gaye or Sam Cooke. Yet among serious soul enthusiasts, his recordings survived. Sometimes musical history preserves the superstar. Sometimes it rescues the artist whose opportunity to become one was suddenly taken away. Cornell Gunter. Cornell Gunter helped supply the exuberant energy behind one of rock and R&B's most entertaining vocal groups. Born in Los Angeles in 1936, Gunter became involved in the West Coast vocal group scene while still young, performing with groups including the Flares before joining a later lineup of the Coasters. His powerful tenor became part of an act whose combination of rhythm and blues, rock and roll, theatrical humor, and storytelling made it distinctive during the late 1950s. The Coasters were already associated with classics created through their celebrated partnership with songwriters Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller. Gunter joined the group during its hit-making period and appeared on recordings including Charlie Brown's On Along Came Jones and Poison Ivy. Those songs turned everyday characters and comic situations into miniature musical dramas, helping the Coasters occupy a unique place in early rock and roll history. After leaving the group, Gunter continued performing and eventually led his own version of the Coasters. That connection to the famous name remained central to his professional life for decades. But on February 26, 1990, his story took a horrifying turn. Gunter was sitting in his automobile in Las Vegas when he was shot multiple times. He died at age 53. The killing became particularly haunting because the case remained unresolved for years, creating exactly the kind of uncertainty that often surrounds discussions of musicians who died violently. However, uncertainty does not justify invention. Claims about organized crime, secret debts, music industry enemies, or hidden business disputes should not be stated as facts without reliable evidence. The documented reality is disturbing enough. Cornell Gunter was murdered and the circumstances did not produce the simple closure his family and admirers deserved. His name may be less familiar than the Coasters themselves, but those classic recordings preserve his contribution. Behind their playful sound lies the darker ending of a singer whose final chapter remains painfully removed from the joy he once brought to the stage. Al Jackson Jr. Al Jackson Jr. rarely stood at the front of the stage, yet his rhythm helped define some of the greatest records ever created at Stax. Born in Memphis in 1935, Jackson became the drummer for Booker T and the MGs, the legendary interracial house band whose economical playing became central to the Memphis soul sound. Nicknamed the Human Timekeeper, he possessed an extraordinary ability to make a groove feel effortless while giving singers exactly the foundation they needed. With Booker T and the MGs, Jackson contributed to instrumental classics such as Green Onions. More importantly, his drumming can be heard throughout the Stax era behind artists including Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, and Wilson Pickett. He was not simply keeping time. His restrained, deeply pocketed approach became part of the architecture of Southern soul. Decades later, the group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Then on October 1, 1975, Jackson's life ended violently. He returned to his Memphis home and was confronted by intruders. The 39-year-old musician was shot multiple times and killed. The circumstances surrounding the homicide generated years of questions, theories, and investigation, but a responsible account should resist presenting unverified claims about who ordered or committed the killing as established fact. The contrast is haunting. Jackson built his reputation through precision and control, yet his final moments were defined by chaos. His name may never have achieved the household recognition of the singers whose records he strengthened, but musicians understand his importance. Al Jackson Jr. died at 39, leaving behind something more enduring than celebrity: a rhythmic language. Every time those classic Stax recordings begin to move, the human timekeeper is still keeping the beat. Angie Stone. Angie Stone's death feels especially painful because it belongs not to distant R&B history, but to the recent past. Born Angela Laverne Brown in Columbia, South Carolina in 1961, Stone entered music before neo-soul even had a name. As a teenager, she became part of The Sequence, the pioneering female hip-hop trio behind Funk You Up, before moving through groups and collaborations that gradually shaped her unmistakably warm, mature sound. Her solo breakthrough arrived with Black Diamond in 1999. Later recordings, particularly Brother and Wish I Didn't Miss You, established Stone as an important voice in the neo-soul movement. She earned 3 Grammy nominations, while The Art of Love and War reached #1 on Billboard's top R&B hip-hop albums chart. Her music carried the experience of an adult woman rather than chasing the youthful formulas dominating commercial radio. Then came March 1, 2025. After performing in Alabama, Stone was traveling toward Atlanta with members of her team when their Sprinter van overturned near Montgomery and was subsequently struck by a large truck. Stone was killed. The other passengers survived. She was 63. There is no factual reason to describe her death as a mysterious conspiracy. It was a devastating traffic accident. The shock comes from its suddenness. Stone was still performing, still traveling, still working when everything ended. For listeners who grew up with the sophisticated R&B of the late 1990s and early 2000s, Angie Stone represented something increasingly rare, music that sounded lived in. Her voice carried love, disappointment, strength, and experience without pretending adulthood was simple. She died suddenly, but the emotional honesty of that voice remains unmistakable. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass seemed unstoppable at the height of his career. Born in Philadelphia in 1950, he first became widely recognized as the commanding lead voice of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. Recordings such as "If You Don't Know Me By Now" and "Wake Up Everybody" helped define the sophisticated Philadelphia soul sound, but Pendergrass possessed enough charisma and vocal power to build something even larger on his own. His solo career turned him into one of R&B's great romantic stars. "Close the Door, Turn Off the Lights," and later "Love." TKO showcased a forceful baritone that could move between tenderness and raw sensuality. His popularity became enormous. The Washington Post noted that 10 consecutive albums sold more than 1 million copies each. Then on March 18, 1982, everything changed. Pendergrass was driving his Rolls-Royce in Philadelphia when the car crashed into trees. He suffered a devastating spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed from the chest down. He was only 31. For a performer whose physical presence had been inseparable from his stage identity, the accident could easily have ended his career. Instead, Pendergrass fought his way back. After months of rehabilitation, he returned to recording and later delivered an emotional performance at Live Aid in Philadelphia in 1985. His comeback transformed his story from one of catastrophe into one of remarkable resilience. Pendergrass lived for nearly 3 more decades after the crash. On January 13, 2010, he died at age 59, following colon cancer and a difficult recovery from surgery. His death itself was therefore not mysterious. The defining tragedy came decades earlier, and so did the triumph. Teddy Pendergrass lost the physical freedom that once powered his performances, but he refused to surrender the voice that had made millions listen. 21 unforgettable voices, 21 lives that ended far too soon or under circumstances no fan could have imagined. From Aaliyah's devastating plane crash and Marvin Gaye's fatal family confrontation, to Sam Cooke's controversial final night and Prince's accidental fentanyl overdose, their endings were different, but the silence they left behind was enormous. Some deaths still inspire questions, while others have clear official explanations that should never be replaced by conspiracy. What remains undeniable is the music. These artists helped shape generations of R&B and soul, and their voices continue long after their final days. But which loss changed music history the most, and which story still leaves you with questions? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Remembered Lives channel for more unforgettable stories.